Hi everyone, welcome back to Around the Business World with Gia. Today I am extremely thrilled to announce a new segment to the show, which is based thoroughly on the field itself. And what a better way to introduce this segment with none other than Miss Mona Seervai. Miss Mona Seervai is an experienced, inspirational, and motivational teacher, IB consultant, and also the head of my school. Miss Mona Seervai has over 25 years of experience in her field, and today she will be representing the educational sector. And without further ado, I can't wait to get an insight on her and her views on the future of education. So we can begin with the interview. The interview is divided into three different segments. The first segment is the About You segment. The second is Teaching as a Career, which is your journey. And the third segment, which is the new segment, is About Your Field. And that will be about the educational sector and questions related to that. Now, let me know once you're ready and we can begin with the interview.
Yeah, thank you, Gia. That's really very sweet of you for this warm and wonderful introduction. So I'm ready to go anytime you are.
All right, perfect. So the first question will be from the About You section, which is could you describe your childhood in a few lines?
Oh, I had a very, very simple childhood. I'm a Kulaba girl. I lived in Kulaba. I went to St. Anne's High School. I'm extremely grateful for it because we had people who owned the Esso petrol pump at that time, including people who were from very, diverse communities. And that I'm really happy about that because I'm able to relate to people from such a wide range of backgrounds and not just one particular type.
All right, perfect. I'm pretty sure diversity must have been amazing. My next question. When you were younger, what profession were you interested in taking up?
Didn't know anything. We didn't have choices like you have now. All I knew is I just had one emotion that I stayed with, and that was I wanted to do something to make a difference to the world. I had no idea of what profession I wanted to do. I just felt whatever I do, I'd like to go to my grave feeling I'd left a little mark on this world.
I'm sure you are already leaving a mark on this world. Okay, my next question is can you describe your journey as a teacher and how you ended up in this profession?
Okay, so my journey as a teacher actually started when I was doing my master's in the US and in Toronto. At that time, I was had to do a teaching assistantship as part of my scholarship. And that's when I realized that while research was one thing and scientific research was the first path I thought I could take to changing the world, I just absolutely loved being in the classroom. I just loved interacting with the kids. At that time, I was in my early 20s. I had students who were older than me, but we just had such a good time together. And that's when I thought, this is something that I would really like to explore further.
All right. I think it's great that you were able to find something you're interested in while you were doing it. Now, this leads me to my next question, which is what are three things that motivate you?
Today, the three things that motivate me are the kids whom I teach. Those are my greatest motivators. What motivates me is just having a very strong spiritual practice and being rooted in myself, in my personal self, and just again, still this desire that I still feel I have the energy to do something to make a change.
All right, perfect. My next question is what is your favorite book and why?
Okay, my absolutely favorite book is The Little Prince by Antoine Saint-Exupéry. I can never pronounce the French name. So why? It's for many reasons. It looks like a children's book. I was just about 17 and I was going to college in Xavier's, and a friend of mine gave it to me. And my first response to it was, what is this book ever going to tell me? But it was slim and it fit into my bag. So I started reading it on the bus to college. I never went to a single class. I spent the whole day hidden behind the plants in the quadrangle of Xavier's. Nobody knew where I was. And I read the book from cover to cover. What is it? And when I thought about it today, I was like, okay, I've read so much, but why is it that The Little Prince still touches me? It's a parable, it's a fable, it's very simple. And that's what I like. Profundity or something that is profound needs to come with something that is absolutely simple. It's a story It's a story of the prince in search for love, in a quest for meaning in life. He meets so many people. He meets people who are trapped in their own environment. He meets people who define success in very different ways. He meets people who don't know who are lost. And at the end of it, he's seeking to validate this love that he has for this selfish, silly little plant that takes up all his time. And he also realized that his plant is not at all unique. But the fact is that because he has such a deep feeling for this sentient being, that is what gives meaning and purpose to life. And if I dip into it again, I always find something new to think about it. So it's always been my favorite book.
I haven't read the book, but I'm sure it's extremely inspirational. However, I think I should read it. Now, my next question is, which person inspires you the most and why?
I can't say that any one person inspires me, but if you're going to link this to our teaching career, I would say that I have been completely inspired by my first principal, who is no more. And her name was Shirin Darasha. She was the principal of a girls' school called JB Pettit High School, which is an ordinary ICSE national curriculum school in South Bombay. What inspired me the most about her was, first of all, she was larger than life. She was double my size, so you can imagine just how large she was. But she wasn't just large physically, she was large emotionally and mentally. And her whole thing was children matter more than anything or anybody else. So the most important thing lesson that she taught me, and I always remember when I had, we put in all these questions in our little tests and so on and so forth. And I was like, oh, the children, they weren't able to answer this question. She just looked at me and she said, what do you mean they weren't able to answer the question? What did you do about teaching them to answer it? And I feel that even in those days, so many years ago, with no IB, she had the right philosophy and the right bent of mind. And most important, nobody matters more than the kids in a school.
That's really nice. My next question is, if you had a magic stick, what would be three things you would change in this world?
Oh, if I had a magic stick, I would just want everybody to be compassionate, kind, and gentle. Maybe you can count that as one. That everybody just cared about other human beings. I would also like these borders to dissolve. This little virus has made them more stark than they ever were. And I would just like everybody to have the attitude of wanting to continue to learn and be curious and not be jaded at all. So, if these are three things that I could change, I just wish everybody would have these dispositions.
I completely and totally agree with all the three you said, especially the first one. Now that ends it for the first segment. Now we're moving on to the second segment, which is your journey and teaching as a career. Now, what has been your most memorable experience or memory as a teacher?
Well, my most memorable moment has been where we used to have homeroom time, right? And during homeroom time, so this was my first position as a teacher in JB Pettit. And at homeroom time, there were some teachers who took it seriously and some teachers who didn't. We had 15 minutes every morning. And there were some of us who really believed in this time because we thought that we could go beyond our subjects. We could go and we could talk about a slice of life. And we took our homeroom time very seriously. And the kids weren't always engaged in homeroom time because, it was like you've just come into school, you want to chat with your friends, you don't want to be bogged down with your teacher telling you something, or even more, some member of your class reading out something, sharing some thoughts, and so on and so forth. So my most memorable moment was at the end of the year, or actually when this particular batch graduated. One of them just came up to me and said, you know what? When we had that homeroom time, I just thought to myself, oh God, every morning there's going to be something. But I now realize the value far beyond the science and the social studies and the math that we learned. And to me, that was such a memorable moment. And it still stays vivid in my memory.
I'm sure it does. The feeling of accomplishment is extremely nice. Now, my next question is, what is the best part of teaching?
Oh, the best part is just being in the classroom, walking up and down, seeing the faces. And the best part is when you can take something really complex. I mean, I don't teach chemistry now in our school, but I've taught chemistry for over 20 years. And I remember that when I went into my first class, there was this plump little girl who sat in the front, and she was like, "Oh, miss, you're teaching chemistry. It's so boring." And I thought to myself, let me work on this and let me make sure that at the end of it, nobody who comes out of my chemistry class should ever say that it's boring. And I really tried to, again, as I said, started in a national curriculum school. I didn't even know I was making transdisciplinary links. I didn't even know I was teaching skills, everything that you take for granted. But just the fact that at the end of the day, people would be like, I love chemistry and I want to, pursue this. Not that I would say that that's what you need to pursue as a postgraduate subject, but that to me has been the best part, that, I could make this come alive. So that's what I like to do. I like to make my classes come alive for students.
Yeah, definitely. I think even in our class, like you try to incorporate a mix of everything so that everyone's engaged throughout the entire session. And that leads me to my next question as well, which is, what is your teaching philosophy?
Oh, my teaching philosophy again is that I'm learning. I'm learning all the time. And every time I challenge myself, I never know enough. So I'm constantly learning. And for me, it's like my teaching philosophy kind of comes from the, Sri Aurobindo's philosophy, that ultimately all knowledge and everything that we seek is already within. You just need to draw it out. Again, the IB calls this constructivist teaching, but it's there in our ancient wisdom. So it's not that I talk and tell down, but I just try to create engagements within the classroom where and that's not just with students, but even when I do workshops for teachers, I try to create opportunities where somebody can just draw out and say, rather than me telling them this, they just connect the dots and say, oh, that's what this means. And that's really been my philosophy right from the start.
Yeah, that's an extremely unique philosophy as well. My next question is, aside from being on a virtual platform, how has lockdown impacted your teaching style?
Oh my God, lockdown has. So initially, it was like, how are we going to do this? The first time I sat in a room, I was like, what am I doing talking to this empty space in front of a screen? But while lockdown has forced us all to go into a virtual platform, it's done more of that. It's just made us plan very much more meticulously and do this in a very sequenced way so that we're able to deliver our classes. Where in a physical class, we would walk around, and now we can't, but literally having to think through, what is it that I have to teach? How am I going to think this through? And honestly, even on Zoom, you can tell when a class goes well and a class doesn't go well. So that reflection on what did I do? How can I make it better? So, the absolute micro steps in which we can make it um, really come alive without being contrived, that has been a really big challenge, but we've gotten better at doing it now. And I'm sure that we will get better. And I'm not talking about gimmicky little things like, oh, use a Jamboard, use a Padlet, but really truly engaging with the class.
I completely agree with that point. Now, that was it for the second segment. We're now moving to the third segment, which is the educational sector. Now, the first question for this segment is, how do you think we can bridge the gap between international education and local both?
So the new education policy is going to start to do that. I think the government also has recognized that there is a lot of depth in international education. When international schools first started coming into this country around the early, I would think it was around the early 2000s, about 20 years ago. I mean, for you have got Kodi International School and Coimbatore International School, but this absolutely big boom. it was seen as this very elite thing with very high fees. I used to really laugh because people said, "Oh, in order to be an international school, you need a swimming pool." And I was like, "No, you don't need that. You need a philosophy, you need a mindset for this kind of education." So, number one, I think there has been a recognition, and there is going to be far more learning, and there is a gap. But the point is that how can we take best practices, how can we take what we do in an international school and translate it, because all kids will learn the same. I actually did that for 2 years before I came into Mount Litra. Between BIS and MLSI, I worked with BMC schools, and some of those were so fulfilling, because these little kids who didn't have the same kind of resources, they loved to sing, they loved to jump, they loved to dance, and they loved to learn in the same way. And it was just very ad hoc because it was in 5 different BMC schools run by a trust. But I think with the government effort now, in which they really truly want to bring these practices and this kind of teaching philosophy, I'm hoping that in the next decade we see a change in this.
I'm sure we will see changes because the BMT has noticed this as well, like you said. Now, my next question is, how does one really ensure the quality of online courses?
I think it's the same as you would ensure the quality of offline courses. For one, whatever the course is, there is a laid out syllabus. There is so there's the knowledge, that's the content, there is the understanding, and there are the skills. And I think whatever you are, what you are online, what you are offline. So the same teacher who's reading from the textbook online was doing that in her classroom anyway. Whereas there are so many of us who've tried to innovate and find strategies in which we can engage with all of you and make you take ownership and agency for your own learning.
All right. Now, my next question is pretty interesting. Is how can we teach globally while acting locally?
Oh, well, Zoom has really opened up all the doors. So now, for example, you know that I had a visit in Japan in the first part of the week. Well, who would have imagined that other than getting up at 4 in the morning to manage their time difference, who would have imagined that? We were able to see classrooms that they teach over there. We were able to see best practices. It was really wonderful. There were some, really inspiring lessons. And what we can do now is Zoom has really shrunk the world. Well, Zoom or Google Meet or whichever, MS Teams or whichever platform. And I think now is an opportunity for us to learn to collaborate in a far more global and a meaningful way. And also, teaching globally doesn't mean traveling, it really means looking at multiple perspectives, looking at diverse perspectives, and also realizing that people across the world, everybody wants the same kind of happiness, everybody wants to be free, everybody wants joy in their lives. So, how can we bridge that gap? I think technology has certainly done it for us. We don't have to travel anymore in order to connect.
All right, yeah, that's one advantage of lockdown. I think we've all learned to learn globally instead of locally. Now, my next question is, what is the difference between education and learning?
Huge. If you limit education, so education means actually drawing out, right? It comes from this Latin word. But if you're limiting education to institutional education, then there's a huge difference. If you are talking about education as being educating in life, then there is no difference, because if you are drawing out, you are learning as you go along in life. And that, I think that there is just, you can never be educated enough. I mean, I'm sure that for the next X number of years that I live, I will always be learning something new. You have to be open. You have to be open to learning. You have to acknowledge that we are all here. So, if you're taking institutionalization, then education is limited to the structure of school and university. And so, learning is life. But if you take education as also being part of life, then the two just become synonymous and you move forward.
All right, I think that cleared up a lot of minds. Now, my next question is, how have you experienced the evolution of education from when you were a child to now when you're teaching?
Huge, huge. But having said that, as I told you, I went to an SSC school right here. But having said the fact that I had many teachers who went by the book, who went by the syllabus, we had our math teacher who was always, squeezing our ears if we didn't get our worksheets right. We were just doing worksheets and homework. I had two very inspiring teachers. One was a primary teacher, and she was my science teacher. And she was unbelievably inspiring because she would design all her classes to question us. And the other teacher was my geography teacher in the senior grades. And she was truly an inspiration because she just made us think. And it had nothing to do with I'm the sage on the stage and I'm going to tell you everything. She really opened worlds for us by teaching us geography. Our history teacher, to some extent, also, she was also our literature teacher. But I found history a little bit, it stuck me a bit because it was like having to memorize all those dates and it was really limited, like dates and events. So while the history teacher did try to tell us the narratives and the stories, just the assessment got us down. So the assessment was very bookish, the assessment was very limited, whereas now we have opportunities to think, to design, for you to be, for you to own your own assessment. And even the way you have IDU in MYP or any of the subjects, your extended essay, your core, the opportunities to do CAS, those are all like by the way. We did have something called social service, but it wasn't as rich as creativity, activity, and services right now.
Yeah, definitely. There's a huge difference in the teaching mechanism. Now, my next question is, how do you think you can influence the mind of the youth?
Oh, I can only influence them by being myself and being and walking my talk. I can't do anything else. If I lecture you, you're not going to listen. But if I walk the talk, I have to be an exemplar, I have to be an example, and I have to believe it because I also believe that kids are very authentic. So I may try and pretend that I believe in something, but you can tell from my demeanor and my disposition that I don't believe in it. Kids will pick it up like this. But if I'm authentic and if I really try and project who I am and what I believe in, I'm sure that kids will appreciate that.
Yes, definitely. Like they say, practice what you preach. Now, that was it for the third segment. And now we have the last question is, did you enjoy being a part of this interview?
Of course, Gia, I always enjoy chatting with you and interacting with you. We chat when you come in 5 minutes early for my class in the morning. So it's always a pleasure and always a pleasure to interact with you. And I hope that we can get to meet soon and give each other a proper hug and not this kind of virtual smile.
Thank you so much, Miss, for being a part of this show. It was extremely nice to have you here. I'm sure you'll inspire a lot of teachers and students as well. Thank you once again for being here. It was great interviewing you.
Thank you, Gia. Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.